Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Pony Podcast, live from isolation. This week we talked to Jess Campbell, currently working for Buckingham Equine Vets, a lovely vet that she is, and Katie Williams of Dengie Horse Feeds, all about laminitis. So Jess talked us through what it is, how you can spot it in your pony, what your treatment options are, and why we need to be particularly careful at this time of year, especially when we can't all get out and be competing and be riding all the time, so our ponies are getting a little bit tubby. And Katie talked us through why we have to be so careful about diet and what you really need to look out for and what you're feeding your ponies, and why high sugar and high starch diets can be such a problem. We really hope you enjoy it. Are you guys ready?
Thank you everyone for agreeing to do this over Zoom.
Well, welcome to the podcast, everyone.
Thanks, team.
How are we all coping with isolation?
It's a bit weird in a way. It is a bit like a bit of a weird holiday, to be honest, at the moment still. A novelty.
Yeah. I feel like we're all going to be, our like grandkids and stuff are going to be like, oh my God, what was it like to live through that? And we're going to be like, honestly, it was just really weird. It was just like Christmas, but really extended.
Yeah, where you're not allowed to see your family.
Yeah. Well, I'm living with my family, so I'm actually okay for seeing my family. But
so you're not allowed to see them, or you see too much of them, I think, in some cases.
Yeah. I'm gonna like move in with a friend and not see them for another, like, we're gonna give each other like 2 months worth of break.
Yeah. We've been really busy because everyone's been stockpiling horse feed in the same way as they have toilet roll and human food. So yeah, we've had a hectic time of it, but hopefully it's settling down now.
Yeah, I have to admit I was one of those that bought a bag, but it was only because it happily coincided with needing more feed rather than stockpiling. And I only have one horse, there's only so much food you can get through.
Well, exactly. It's like, I think some people must have got about 2 years worth of feed in stock, but there we go. Hopefully it's not going to need to go on that long.
Well, anyway,
as we're on the subject.
Yeah, so we're here today to talk about laminitis, because we're coming into spring and we thought it'd be really helpful to give you guys a lowdown on causes and ways that you can prevent it. So probably starting with Jess for this one, would you be able to give our listeners an overview of what laminitis is?
Yeah, so laminitis is literally the inflammation of the laminae in the foot. And the laminitis is a bit of soft tissue that binds the pedal bone in the foot to the inside of the hoof wall, so it's really, really important for stability of all the structures in the foot. And obviously your horse's weight all goes through 4 very small feet in comparison to how heavy the horse is. So if you've got any inflammation in the feet, the horse obviously can't rest its legs the same way you would if it was a human. The problem with laminitis is that the hoof capsule is solid and immovable, and so as the laminae inside the hoof capsule swell, you just get an increase in pressure inside the foot that can't go anywhere. And with the fact that the horse can't take its weight off its feet, mean that the horse is then in a really painful situation.
Yeah, that pressure not being able to go anywhere, that's why they get really hot feet, like if you feel the hoof wall, and why their digital pulse gets really strong. Yeah
exactly. So the heat that you can feel in the hoof wall, heat always comes with inflammation, because when you get swelling or inflammation, you get an increased blood flow to the area. So that's why you get both the increased digital pulse and the heat in the feet. Yeah.
And it's caused by the increase in sugars in the grass. And I did read a really good explanation of it in a book, explanation of the biological process of there's loads of sugar, so there's increased cell metabolism, I think, and then you get an increase in lactic acid. Maybe I'm wrong.
So less to do with things like lactic acid, and the main contributing factors or sort of risk factors for laminitis are obesity is sort of the leading cause, but even being a pony rather than a horse is a risk factor because of their metabolism, but also underlying hormonal diseases, so either Cushing's or equine metabolic syndrome, because both of those again have impacts on the horse's metabolism. So I think what you were probably reading about is because obesity in obese horses, they have increased what we call increased adipose tissue. So the adipose tissue is within that increased fat tissue that the horse has, and we now know that tissue itself can have a direct effect on the hormones in the horse's body, which can then do some insulin resistance, which can then the insulin resistance causes a poor control of the blood sugar levels in that horse, which then leads on to the horse being at increased risk of laminitis.
Yeah. So it's a bit like diabetes in humans.
Yeah, similar idea. Yeah, with insulin resistance, and then the horse being able to not regulate their blood sugar levels.
In some research papers that have been done, they've shown that insulin resistance itself can be enough to trigger laminitis. You don't even then actually need the food overload or whatever it might be, but that's in very controlled research conditions where they're taking things to the extreme. So hyperinsulinemia or insulin resistance can be an issue in its own right.
Yeah. What are the symptoms that you would look for if you thought your pony might have laminitis?
So laminitis can affect any leg, but most commonly it affects both front legs at the same time. Quite often one foot will be worse than the other foot, but very usually they'll be both feet. So firstly, you probably would notice that your horse or pony was lame or a bit uncomfortable in front. So if it's very mild, they might just get a bit of a short, shuffly stride, right up to not wanting to walk at all. Particularly, they'll probably be more lame on hard surfaces, or if you're asking them to turn. If you just saw the horse stood in a field or in the stable, they can lean right back on their heels, trying to take the weight off the front of their feet, and they can even shift their weight to look like they're rocking from side to side a little bit.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, obviously, as you've already mentioned, the fact that you can feel quite a lot of heat in the feet and much increased digital pulses.
We mentioned about obesity. Katie, how can their diet affect how susceptible a horse is to contracting laminitis?
Sure, when you have obviously the chronic issues, so if you're overfeeding for a prolonged period of time contributing to obesity, then that is one risk factor. As Jess explained, once you go into that obese status, it can certainly disrupt your insulin metabolism, and that puts you at risk straight away. And then you have the more acute situations where an overload of starch or sugar primarily are the two things you'd be most concerned about. And obviously, I think it's been shown that horses on high sugar and starch diets have a tendency to be more insulin resistant than horses on fibre and fat diets. So what you're feeding, how much you're feeding, and how long you're feeding it for are all the different things that can contribute to the laminitis risk. And the other thing I would say to look out for as well is that cresty neck, because obviously we seem to see the association with that fat right on the crest hardening as another potential risk factor. I mean, you do hear people saying, oh, he's looking a bit cresty and a bit footy, and the two can often go hand in hand, to be honest. So it usually takes a cumulative effect of 2 or 3 of those different things combining to give you that perfect storm. But yes, certainly those are the sort of things I would look out for or be wary of.
You often see feeds advertised as being like laminitis friendly or low calorie. What's different about those feeds compared to like their normal counterpart?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because when we're looking at things like sugar, firstly, unless a company makes a claim about the sugar level in its product, it's not actually a legal requirement to declare the sugar value on a bag of feed or on your website. So it's a really useful, vital part of a piece of information for a horse owner, but it's not something in the rules that we actually have to declare. So if you then do make a claim about the sugar content or its calorie value, then you should declare what you're putting in there and how much, because you then actually are linking a claim to a product benefit, really. With sugar, again, another key point is that the legal method that we use that has to go on the bag if you make a claim is for simple sugars. So that would just be things like glucose and fructose, simple types of sugars. It doesn't then include your water soluble carbohydrates, which would be things like fructan. So they are just as big a risk factor. You'd find them in grass naturally occurring. But again, unless you specifically ask a company for a water soluble carbohydrate analysis, you wouldn't get that level of information. So to answer your question, a simple sort of laminitis friendly product would be lower in sugar, lower in starch, but it would also likely to have some other content of fibre or oil maybe to provide some calories. So it's giving you energy from a different form. But the main criteria would be that it was low in sugar, low in starch.
If they're not, like, if companies don't have to put on the bag how much sugar is in there, if you're worried about how much sugar your horse is getting, what should you look out for? Or is there anything you should like avoid that is sugar, but without them having to say that it's got glucose or sucrose in it?
Yeah, I mean, all companies should give you that information on request. So if you do speak to them, email them, a lot of people would have it on their websites, especially, to be honest, if your sugar levels are very low, it's something you tend to want to tell people because a lot of people are looking for it. It's usually only if you're trying to hide something you might not, declare it. So have a good look on people's websites, ring the feed lines and the emails, and the reputable companies will give you that information quite willingly. In terms of ingredients, the biggest source of sugar in most horses' diet is grass. So actually it's the grass in the field and the grass in the hay net and the grass everywhere else that would be providing the most sugar. But obviously the one that gets talked about a lot is molasses. And it is important to always put into context. Okay, so molasses has a lot of sugar in it, but we're putting a really small amount of molasses into a feed, or most feeds anyway. So the actual overall sugar that it's contributing might be relatively low, even though it contains molasses. But obviously, if you want to go for the lowest sugar feed possible, avoid things like molasses, and then in feeds you would obviously avoid cereals which are full of starch, which ultimately is broken down to sugar. So if you can go cereal free, go molasses free, then you're on a pretty safe territory for being laminitis friendly.
Okay. Although ideally you want to prevent your horse from getting laminitis in the first place, once a horse has had laminitis, why do they become more susceptible? And what do you have to be more careful about when you feed it?
I think going to your first point, Alex, with why do they become more susceptible, I don't think it's that they become more susceptible having had laminitis once. I think it's probably the fact that that horse has always been more susceptible to getting laminitis. And again, we don't necessarily really have a brilliant understanding of why some horses seem to get it more than others, apart from the fact that we know, being a native type pony puts you at a higher risk. So the thought process is it's all to do coming back to that individual horse or pony's metabolism and how sensitive or not they are to insulin.
Yeah, so with regards to feeding, then the base needs to be fibre, and we generally recommend at least 1.5% of a horse's body weight should be fed as forage or high fibre materials. I'm not anti-straw. Some people don't like the idea of feeding it, but to be honest, it gives you 2 times of fibre without calories. So for a lot of horses, it's a great way of meeting their fibre requirement. You can still soak it. So if you have a horse with respiratory allergies or problems, then soaking straw is just as acceptable as soaking hay. And we recommend about 30% of the total forage per day could be straw. And you'd obviously not give it to something that has dental issues or anything like that. But, there are lots of products that contain straw that horses eat perfectly well. So, and that can be really useful if you've got if you've got good quality hay or haylage on a livery yard and you're not allowed to source sub from elsewhere. Diluting it with some straw can be a really easy way of actually bringing that sort of calorie and sugar intake down. And then alongside that, just balancing the ration. Those horses and ponies, even though they're overweight, they still need a balanced diet. So things like vitamins and minerals, they're important for general health and well-being, repairing tissues, and a poorly pony with laminitis certainly needs all of that. So balances or supplements are really cost-effective ways to balance the ration. It then starts to get a little bit more complicated if you've got a poor doer, maybe that's a PPID case or Cushing's case that you want to condition, even though it's prone to laminitis. You build up from just getting the forage right, then you balance the ration, and then we would put things like quality fibres, unmolashed sugar beets, alfalfa, and maybe some fats and oils in if you need further calories. But it's that sort of building block process that we would start with.
We spoke a while ago to a lovely lady from Equine who deal with prebiotics for horses' guts, and we spoke a little bit about how some conditions like laminitis and like stomach ulcers can be helped by increasing diversity of bacteria in horses' guts. Have you seen any evidence for that?
It is a contentious issue, and you know, regardless of what you think of the equine and things, but there has been some published work looking at prebiotics. Responder et al. Actually, in I think it was 2005 now, not relating to equibiome or whatever, and they actually showed that the lactic acid utilising bacteria in the stomach were increased when fed a prebiotic. Now it's one study, one paper. It is published in a peer-reviewed journal, so it is a reasonably good study, but it's not related to any commercial products. And again, on a legal kind of side of things, there are no legal probiotics approved for use in horses. So it's, if you've got prebiotics, they have some science behind them in other species as well as horses. But it's probably best not to go much further than that.
If you think your horse has laminitis, going with the symptoms that we discussed a bit earlier, what's the best thing that you can do? Because obviously laminitis is something that you need to phone the vet for. What can you do to make your horse as comfortable as possible?
Yeah, so that's a really good point, actually. So whilst you wait for your vet, the best thing to do would be to get your horse off the grass if it's in the field, and get it as comfortable as possible. So a really big, thick, deep shavings bed in the stable that goes right up to the door. Or, you know, if you're not lucky enough to have a stable, work out how you're going to make one, you know, getting a door on a field shelter and getting a nice big shavings bed in a field shelter or something like that, so that the horses or ponies on box rest. And the other thing that you can do that's really brilliant to help both comfort levels and the progression of the laminitis is to cool the feet as much as possible. So you can get ice cube bags that you just fill up with water and put in the freezer. And they can just wrap around the feet and just get literally tape them onto the feet around the coronet bands, just to try and cool them as much as possible. Obviously, leave it on for about 10 to 15 minutes and then take them off for 10 to 15 minutes before you replace them again. But yeah, it's really cooling, and get the horse comfy by supporting the feet with a big deep bed.
That's really interesting, because I've heard that warm water's better because it dilates the blood vessels in the foot, so it aids recovery and helps blood flow.
So initially you don't want that. So what's happening with the laminitis in the inflammation, you've got a lot of vasodilation going on in the feet. So you want to try and decrease the inflammation, that initial acute stage of inflammation, and really cool the feet down.
Once your vet has arrived, what are the treatment options and the outcomes for your horse having laminitis?
So it's quite tricky, really, because there's nothing we can do immediately to reverse the actual laminitis itself. But what the vet will do is get the horse onto some pain medications to get it as comfortable as possible. You know, it depends how uncomfy it is to start with what medications your vet will go with. But, you know, in these cases, vets always treat a laminitis case as an emergency case. The second thing we would do is get some foot support on the horse. So whether that's good enough to be just a deep bed, or whether the horse needs a little bit more help, which might mean some styrofoam pads which get taped onto the feet, or some frog support, or some impression material, which is a bit like putty, which you can put in the feet, which then hardens and supports the feet. We'd also obviously advise cooling the feet as well, if that hasn't already been started. And then, so really that's the sort of first line things we do immediately when you first see the horse. And then, you know, it goes back to what we've been discussing a little bit already with diet changes. So we'd have a bit of a discussion about how, you know, really, especially in the acute phase, of how we don't want that horse to be on any grass. As Katie was saying, you know, there's such a high sugar content in grass, and we'd have a bit of a discussion about what feed the horse was on as its normal diet and how we can cut the calories and the sugar content out of that as quickly as possible. And we'd also have a bit of a chat about if there was any chance that your horse or pony might have an underlying endocrine disease, so Cushing's or equine metabolic syndrome, which is EMS, and whether we need to start thinking about testing for those. You know, as we get a little bit further down the line, when we've got that horse comfortable enough to start with, we would definitely start discussing about using some x-rays to see the severity of the laminitis, because what we really worry about in laminitis is if it gets quite severe, the pedal bone can move, so it can either drop in the foot or it can rotate in the foot, and the amount of movement of the pedal bone is really what gives us the prognosis going forwards.
Does it affect, because the pedal bone attaches to all the tendons that then run up the leg, so if it rotates, does it mean that the tendons aren't as strong?
I think so. The amount the pedal bone rotates, it's just by single degrees. Okay. So it becomes catastrophic before it starts affecting the biomechanics of the leg.
Okay. I think it was you who told me that like what laminitis feels like to the horses, like if you had a splinter under your nail, and you were saying that it's one of the things that one of the most popular things you see, that people just don't clock how painful it is for their ponies.
Yeah, I think sometimes probably what I was meaning was that some of the little old laminitis prone ponies, occasionally owners can get a bit used to the fact that their pony gets a bit of laminitis every year and stop treating it as much of an emergency as they probably did initially.
Yeah.
But stop treating the laminitis as seriously as they did when the pony first had it.
Yeah.
You know, even though what these chronic laminitis cases, you know, you can still get rotation in the pedal bones, and the ponies are still very uncomfortable bilaterally in front, and it does need to be taken seriously to try and make them as comfortable as possible.
Yeah.
So, Katie, you spoke about how being overweight can have a really big impact on how easy it is for a horse to get laminitis. How much of a problem is obesity in horses at the moment?
Significant, certainly in the leisure horse population. I think estimates generally come back at somewhere around 40 to 50% of the leisure horse population in the UK is overweight or obese, so it is a very big issue. It's even been a storyline on the Archers. There was a Radio 4 addict. I was most impressed to see it being covered, and I'm sure Jess excellent. Well, I'm sure Jess has better bedside manner than Jakob, the vet in the Archers, who was upsetting lots of people with telling them that their horses were overweight. But yeah, it is a hot topic for our industry, as it is, I think, in pets and humans to some extent as well. But yeah, we have portable weigh bridges that we take out, and we record data and things. And from the sorts of people that we're seeing from our own data, it's way over 50% of leisure horses that are. But that's a very sort of controlled population that we get to see. Obviously, when you look at it as a total population, things like racehorses and that bring the average down, but it is a really high proportion. And I think there's a number of factors contributing to that. People just, we have this sliding scale phenomenon, people seeing cuddly as normal. So if you're doing body condition scoring, we try to avoid the number 3 slot or the middle slot being the perfect or ideal weight, because actually if you've got a laminitic pain, you might want it to 2.5 on a 5-point scale to actually be the right weight or the correct weight for that pony, because you want to reduce its risk. And obviously a racehorse is more likely to be something like a 2 to 2.5, but we're seeing a lots of 4s and 5s, and it becomes not a competition, but people compare their own pony and think, well, it's not as fat as that one in the stable next door, so mine can't be bad, but actually, or too bad, it's already a condition score 5, and the one next door is like a 5++. So you do sort of find the phenomenon of people sliding the scale a bit to, well, my pony isn't as fat as yours, therefore it's okay, but that's not the case. Once they're fat, and they're all at risk of laminitis.
I think it's so difficult if you've not worked with horses for a long time, if you don't have experience seeing loads of different types and what they look like when they're fit. You know, like a fat racehorse looks a lot skinnier than a fit cob.
Yes, absolutely. And we're a nation of animal lovers, and it's much more socially acceptable to have an animal that's sort of slightly cuddly or slightly overweight than it would be to have one underweight. And we did some stats. We have some great case studies. We got one Connemara pony to lose nearly 100 kilos in 6 months, whatever it was, but that equated to 16 stone. And we use it a lot when we go to do talks and things, and say to people, if you saw someone sat on their horse 24 hours a day and they weighed 16 stone on a Connemara pony, you'd have something to say about it. It was a case study that we did called Jake, and he actually, one of my colleagues went out to see him, and he was a Connemara pony, and his owner was pregnant, so she couldn't ride. And when we started, he was something like 490 kilos, which is nearer a horse kind of weight. By the time we finished, we got 100 kilos off of him, which we equated to being 16 stone in human terms. And we use them quite a lot to show, because 16 stone 24/7 on a horse, if someone was sat that heavy on a horse all day every day, everyone else would see it as a cruelty issue. Whereas when it's just a fat pony, they don't equate that extra weight with the potential harm it can be doing to them, joints, lungs, respiratory system, whatever, when you're trying to work them. So obesity, it's become normalized, I suppose. We've become a little bit immune to it, which is.
Do you see it in a lot in certain types of horses? Like, would you see more overweight, like dressage horses, than show jumpers?
Yes, I would say certainly in the sports horse, generally the warm bloods tend to be good doers, and so they tend to be dressage. I mean, obviously, if we're going to sort of pin the blame on a certain discipline, showing has a lot to answer for.
I didn't want to say the word, but that was where I was going.
I'll probably get shot by all the showing fans, but no, but it is a fact, and I think even Horse and Hound and other publications have run sort of a show hunter 50 years ago compared to a show hunter now, and the sort of comparison it's just like mega sort of increases in sizes of these show horses, and you can hear it in their respiratory noises that they're making as they try to gallop in the show ring. So I think it would be great if showing could lead the way and really introduce some sort of hard-hitting initiatives to promote fit, healthy horses in good condition, but not obese or overweight, as a sort of real mission in that area.
Right. What would be your top tips for managing your horse's weight and how to make sure that it's the right weight?
Well, there was a question about the sort of things that you couldn't live without, and I think grazing muzzles tend to be quite contentious. There are some customers and clients that we deal with that really don't like the idea of them, but my colleague Tracy, for her master's degree, looked at the amount of grass that they actually restrict the horse from eating, and it tied in very nicely with another study done by Annette Longland, where it was about a 75 to 80% reduction in grass intake from using a grazing muzzle. So if you can keep them on, some ponies are real Houdinis and very good at escaping from them, but if you can keep them on, they are a really effective way, and it does mean that pony can actually go out and move around and have some interaction with other horses and ponies, and that's got to be better than being confined to a stable. If you don't like them, then I would suggest the sort of track grazing, where again they go in a little track around the edge of the field so they can move around with their sort of companions. Those two sorts of tools, I would say, are probably the best, most worthwhile things to invest in. And then it's just all about managing your, controlling your calorie intake as best you can. And we sort of touched on that earlier. Things like straw shouldn't be underestimated because they can be so useful for providing 2 time without calories, really. So that's probably my things.
Well, that's it. I think that's everything we've got. So thank you guys both so much for talking to us. I know, Katie, you've answered our what's one thing you couldn't live without. Jess, what's one thing you couldn't live without?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky one. I think from a feeding and horse weight point of view, whilst we're on the topic, I actually couldn't live without the massive range of chaffs I use. So I actually use all the Dengie chaffs for my eventers at home, and they're all such individuals that some of them are on the alpha A oil, the ones that struggle with their weight, and then we've got ones right up onto the hi-fi light, the slightly porkier good doers that need help in not getting too chubby. So yeah, I think from a feeding point of view, that's absolutely what I can't live without.
We've actually we've had on Dengie chaff, but I don't think I've ever used anything other than the original and then alpha A oil once I started having horses who were doing big things.
We have I think 5 or 6 different chaff options, Dengie chaff options in our feed room.
I had to laugh because when I took my horse for her first 3-day, I've always used the hi-fi molasses free. Yeah. And I was there at Osberton for my first 3-day, and I had like half a scoop of the molasses free and a few pasture cubes because my horse is such a good doer and she's a little bit feisty. So I don't want any extra sugar, don't want any extra energy. And everyone else had like their 3 feeds a day and all their mix, and I was there like.
But it does go to show how horses can do a lot of work on what seems to be very little, and I think that's another issue. People do overfeed and resort to cereal-based feeds. Obviously I'm biased, and thank you very much for the Dengie mentions, but any fibre will provide.
Put that out there.
But any fibre will provide energy, and people don't necessarily equate that. So, that horses can, alpha oil, I think you mentioned, that has the same energy level as a conditioning mix or a competition mix. Really? So, you can, so 12.5 megajoules. So there's a lot of energy in those feeds. It's all slow release, but it is there. So for fueling work, hard work, stamina type work, there's no reason why horses can't do really well on fibre and oils. So it is a bit of a myth that people default to having to use cereals when you're doing higher workloads or faster work. So yeah.
My plant source is on the alpha A light and a balancer, and that's all he's on all year.
Really?
Perfect. There you go. And that's key, isn't it? Getting the quality of the vitamins and minerals to balance it as well. So that's where it really counts, alongside the quality fibre. I hadn't
really appreciated that quality feed makes such a difference until I was I mean, I won't say where I was working or what feed they were using, but just the amount of food they were pumping into their horses, and like mine was on like half a scoop of nuts and alpha oil, and she was on basically nothing. She had a shine in her coat which none of the other horses had. None of the other horses were keeping weight on even nearly as well as she was, and I was just like, you're using so much feed and my horse is on like nothing and she looks great.
Yeah, it does. What you put in, you get it out. What you put in, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. And it's a false economy using some of these cheaper brands, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you both so much for talking to us and answering all our many questions.
No, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. And sorry I didn't get to meet you properly, Jess, but nice to have met you verbally.
One day, when all this is over.
Oh, yeah. God, that would be nice.
When all this is over, I'm going to go on a big holiday. We're all going to have a big meal at the pub, drink at the pub.
Tess, the only other thing I haven't mentioned, actually, thinking about the current corona situation, is the a lot, with people being advised not to ride so much at the moment. There's a lot of talk of people turning their horses away, and actually from a laminitis risk point of view, that's a really important thing just to consider in horses. If you have a horse that might be that way inclined, that would normally be in quite a lot of work during the summer because of either pony club competitions or camp or eventing or whatever else you normally do with your horse over the summer months, just be really aware of the laminitis risk of turning the horse away 24/7.
Point. I hadn't even thought of that. I hadn't even considered it.
I think
it's a really good point. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, it's all right. Especially if people are planning on giving them a lot of time without being exercised as well. You know, obviously, we're all worried sitting at home doing our online workouts if the horse aren't doing any work either.
Joe Wicks.
Joe Wicks of ponies.
Yes.
Well, yeah, thank you. Yeah, anyway, thanks so much for the extra. I hadn't even thought of that. That's really. I know so many people who turn their horses out because they're too naughty to keep them in work. And it does make me very glad that my horse is as safe as she is. I did text her rider and say, if you want to chuck her out, then go ahead. But like, she's so safe, I don't mind if you want to carry on doing flat work and pole work and stuff. And I think if she was any naughtier, I would have said, just put her in a field.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky balance at the moment.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. We hope you enjoyed your experience being on the Pony Podcast.
Thank you very much for having us.
Very much.
Sorry for the editing you have to do.
I've got nothing else to do now because I'm furloughed from work, so I've got a lot of time. This one, the production value is going to be so high. I'm going to have so much free time.
Brilliant.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much.
Lovely to meet you all.
Lovely to meet you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed listening to that as much as we enjoyed recording it. Talking to Katie and Jess really was so much fun. We've been trying to get Jess on for ages in particular, and then being able to work with Dengie on this was so good. Just so you're aware, we are currently running a competition with Dengie. They have so kindly offered to give us some feed vouchers as well as a goodie bag just to make life a little bit easier in this interesting time that we're living in. If you want more details on entering the competition, head over to our Instagram page where details will be posted very soon. In the meantime, just stay safe everyone, stay indoors as much as possible, keep washing those hands, and if you want anyone to chat to, if you want any additional contact with human beings, we are always at the end of our emails and we love chatting to you all, so just either DM us on Instagram, we are at The Pony Podcast, message us on Facebook, The Pony Podcast, or send us an email at theponypod@gmail.com. We are also on Flick, so just join our Flick group and message us whatever you want, whenever you want. Hope you guys are all okay. All right, bye.